Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Dr. Taslim Alani-Verjee, and we're going to be talking today about managing the mental health of leaders, how to support yourselves as well as your teams. So to start off, I will introduce myself. Like I said, my name is Dr. Taslim Alani-Verjee. I am a clinical psychologist by training and also the founder and director of SILM Center for Mental Health. Throughout today's webinar, I will walk you through some of the services that SILM Center for Mental Health are offering right now in ways that we can support you as leaders, we can support your team members, but that's not the goal of today. So this isn't some giant marketing scheme. Rather, it's tools so that you can better support yourselves and your teams in ways that hopefully we could be of service to you as well throughout the process. So first, before anything else, I think it's really important to acknowledge that this has been a new time. And, we hear all over the place in the news when anyone is making some sort of speaking engagement, these are unprecedented times. And sure, they are. But let's, for a second, just break down what exactly that means. I mean, if you think for yourself about some of the changes that you've experienced recently, there are loads of them. I mean, we're definitely going out less. The scope of our jobs have likely changed. The way we interact with people has changed. Who we're spending time with at home has changed. And for some of us, that may be just ourselves. And for others, that may be a lot more people than we'd like to be around. And so whether it's solely those things or whether there's also people in our lives who are passing away, people who are getting sick, there are just a lot of changes. And so as we talk about supporting the mental health of ourselves and our teams, the very first thing to acknowledge is that our mental health is probably being affected by what's going on right now. And so let's acknowledge it and let's talk about what we're supposed to do with it. I also wanted to mention what I've done with the chat box is I've made it so that you can only chat with me. And the reason why is I want to be able to answer your questions. And I don't want you to worry about the nature of the question. And I don't know the scope of everyone here's work. And so I want to make sure that this is actually quite relevant to all of you. So if I'm not addressing something that's related to your workplace setting, or your teams, please feel free to ask for clarification, ask me to address the specific problem, and I'm happy to do so. I'll likely do so at the end of the webinar, just so that I can keep a bit of a flow going unless something relevant comes up, and then I'll try to integrate it in. But yes, please feel free to ask questions, and hopefully I have some answers, and if not, I at least commit to looking into it and getting back to you as soon as I can. So back to our own mental health. One of the things that we're probably experiencing is a lot of different emotions and reactions, and none of them are wrong. We might be experiencing increased stress, which is usually in response to specific demands that we might be experiencing. And then we might also be dealing with anxiety. And usually we get anxiety when there's a buildup of a lot of different stressors in our life, and when we're not necessarily resolving those stressors. And so that anxiety might come through in racing thoughts. We might even feel our heart racing a little bit more. We might notice ourselves feeling shaky. It might be hard to focus or concentrate. All of these things can be examples of anxiety. The other thing we might be experiencing is grief right now. I mean, we've lost so much, not only from our everyday lives, but for many of us, the projects that we were working on, the cool, innovative things we were working on, many of those have likely had to stop. And what we invested, we might be losing out now. And so there's some grief in that, as well as the larger grief of this society and everything that we've lost. The ability to do things, our freedoms, the not knowing how this ends or when it ends, and what normal is going to look like, and grieving what normal used to be, because to some extent we know that it's never going to be quite the same. Our workplaces might never be the same. And so there's a lot of grief in that. For some of us, our workload may have increased, or our stress and emotions related to our workload may have increased. And so we might be also experiencing some burnout, which means that we're tired and we're not feeling super motivated. Research tells us that right now, most people are not as motivated as they usually would be. And so that's natural to expect. But when we're experiencing burnout, that level of engagement, that level of motivation is necessarily quite lower. We might also notice ourselves withdrawing from people that we would usually want to talk to, or withdrawing from activities that we would usually enjoy. And so it's important to kind of keep note of that as well. And then there might also be some isolation and some loneliness because we're not interacting with people the way we usually would. No matter what we're experiencing, and we might be experiencing all of that stuff or none of that stuff, it's important to acknowledge it. It's important to ask ourselves, where are we at with our own mental health? The Mental Health Commission for Canada has a pretty cool spectrum for us to be able to address where we're at with our mental health. But what I think is even better is if you develop one of these for yourself, and maybe even encourage your teams to do the same. How do you know when you're feeling well? What does that look like for you? Does it look like, talking to friends and family regularly? Does it look like waking up at the same time every morning, ready to go? Or does it look like getting ready to go to bed at a certain time? Does it look like laughing in a certain way or eating in a certain way? And then what does it look like when you're feeling less well, like you're still doing what you need to be doing, but you're probably a little bit stressed? And how can you describe those moments in your life? How can you describe when things are getting even worse? And maybe if we think about it as like a stoplight, when you're maybe in like a yellow or an orange zone, how do you know what that looks like for you? And then how do you know when you're in the red? And for many of us, we've probably been in the red before at some point, where we're just not able to really carry on with many of our responsibilities. And so if you can do that for yourself, you can actually check in with yourself regularly and ask yourself, where are you at with your mental health? What do you need to be doing? And how can you get yourself out of this situation? How can you take care of yourself? Then there's also questions around your motivation. Where is your motivation at? And then some fear around potential job security. And so even though you're a leader, what does that mean for you? Does that necessarily mean that you have job security? Because when we're managing teams, our team members are probably struggling a little bit with their own job security, but we might be experiencing some of that as well. And so being able to acknowledge it and call it for what it is important, because the more we avoid these difficult emotions and these difficult thoughts, the more they creep up on us in unexpected ways. And we find that we surprise ourselves sometimes in our reactions, sometimes in our engagement. And it's best not to surprise ourselves in ways that don't necessarily work out very well for us. So the ultimate question in all of this is, what do we need to do to take care of ourselves right now? And what that will look like is going to be different for all of us. And so pause and ask yourself, what do you need? What usually does keep you well? And for many of us, these things are usually outside of the home, but even things like getting a regular amount of sleep, probably around 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep, is good for most of us. Some of us may need a little less or a little more. We probably have a pretty typical diet that we adhere to when we're taking care of ourselves. Is that the way it usually is right now? We usually have people that we like to talk to and connect with. Are we doing those things? And can we make any changes to those things? Where are we at with our physical activity, and can we make some changes to that? Some things to try to help maintain mental health is to set a routine for the day, have a schedule, and maybe start that routine out with some sort of mindfulness exercise or a visualization of what you want your day to look like. Just starting it off on a positive note can really set the tone for the day. If possible, try to have a separate workspace for yourself. And so you might have a home office, and so that's cool, it's taken care of. But if you don't, try to find a space in your home that you don't typically use very often. I know some of the people that I'm working with right now, they're working from their bedrooms because that's where their desk is. It's not ideal, because then your rest space and your workspace become the same. Of course, if those are the circumstances, do what you need to. But if you have a dining table that you never use, or an island that you never use, or a second bedroom that you never use those spaces, because then you get to create a little bit more separation between work and home. And then you get to leave that space, and you don't necessarily need to go back to it until the next day. Try to also start and stop at the same time, because that helps to contain your workday. It doesn't really matter when you start and when you stop. The more consistent you can be about it, the better. But just having a start and stop time can really make a difference. And then schedule things or after work. And the best thing to do is to actually mark the end of work with a special activity. And so if you have a song that you used to listen to on your commute home, listen to that song. If there's an activity that you can do to switch your mind from work brain to home brain, do that thing. Because otherwise, we're literally just standing up, we're home, and the work part of our brain doesn't shut off. And so being able to intentionally stop work and start home makes a difference. And then have activities, right? Whether it's preparing dinner, whether it's watching TV, whether it's having like a games night with your friends virtually, it doesn't matter, but do the things that are going to work for you and that feel good. For many of us, we might not necessarily be able to stop work at a certain time, and it might bleed into the evening. And that's the nature of life. But there's still an important thing that needs to be done to mark the end of it. So even if you consider it a break to make dinner, eat, rest, and then get back to work, try to mark those endings and beginnings with specific tasks so that you are creating boundaries for yourself around when you start and stop work. Sleep hygiene is also really important. And one of the most important things for sleep hygiene is to avoid screen time before bed. And so if you can, as much as possible, avoid screen time for about an hour before bed, that is the best thing you could do for yourself. And so that means likely stopping work at least an hour before bed and doing something else for that period of time. And then practice self-compassion. Things are hard right now, and it's okay for them to be hard right now. You might not be feeling motivated to do all of the things on your list. That's also okay. One of the things that happens when we're leaders is that we feel so much pressure and so much of the weight of our projects and our team members on us. And yeah, it's important for us to be able to follow through with commitments and to keep people engaged. But it's also important for us to acknowledge that this is hard. And if we don't acknowledge it, it's going to catch up with us and it's going to affect us in different ways. So if you need to slow down, make your list and get rid of the things that you don't actually need to do right now. Put them aside, set them for a specific time, or a lot of specific time for them if you've noticed that you've been avoiding those things. But give yourself a bit of a break. As a leader, some of the things that you can do are to be adaptive and to practice cognitive flexibility. One of the things that happens when we're feeling anxious is we actually root in a little bit more into our patterns. And if you're someone who likes control, I mean, this is a very unpredictable time. And so you might notice yourself trying to micromanage a little bit more, or trying to keep to a rigid schedule, having rigid attitudes towards things, because this is a way for you to exert control in an unpredictable time. Alternatively, you might be someone who's very go with the flow. And so you let people kind of take their own initiative and start their own projects. And so in an anxious time, you're a little bit more likely to do that. If you're someone who doesn't like confrontation, you're more likely to avoid confrontation when you're feeling highly anxious. And so being able to be cognitive flexible means acknowledging your anxiety and recognizing how you can push yourself just a little bit to notice your patterns, to notice your rigidity, and to step out of your comfort zone. But the other part of that cognitive flexibility is adapting, right? Many of us have lost our normal patterns of work. Many of the projects that we're used to doing and the ways we used to conduct those projects have probably been interrupted. And so how can we seize this and not see it necessarily as a problem or an obstacle, but as an opportunity? And yeah, that can be super hard, especially when it feels like everything is falling apart. But those who can see this as an opportunity and can find creative problem solving, those are the businesses, those are the leaders, those are the teams that will find success. So ask yourself. And you also don't need to do this alone. You have a team. You probably have people who work above you, who work beside you, who work under you. Lean on all those people. Ask them for help around problem solving. Leaders often feel like they need to carry the weight of everything themselves, but that's not at all the case. You have people who are probably really willing to help and who are really talented. So ask them if they have ideas for how that adaptation can happen, how you guys can switch lenses, work on different things, and make the most of this situation. It's also really important to be authentic as a leader. Sorry. Most people can tell when you're not being authentic, which means that if you're pretending that you're totally okay with what's going on when you're talking to your team members, they'll probably notice if you're not feeling that well or when you're actually freaking out inside. So the best thing you can do is to be authentic. Now, you might want to temper that, right? So you might not want to talk about all of your fears and all of your anxieties around, the team shutting down or a project not being able to be followed through on. But you can share that this is a hard time for you too. Because it's true. And the more authentic we can be, the more relatable we are. The more relatable we are, the better our team cohesion ends up being. We become one of the team members, and we become someone that our team members can actually come to and talk to when they're struggling. When all you have on your face is a smile and all you're talking about is how well things are going, you're not that relatable. You're not someone that people can trust, because how could you be totally fine with all of this given the circumstances? So authenticity is extremely important to that team cohesion. And when you're not authentic, it can break trust, and it can be a challenge for team cohesion. People management is one of the biggest roles of a leader. And so it's not just the projects and the tasks and the outcomes, it's how the team works together. And so how can you leverage your people? What are their strengths? How can they come together in new and creative ways? It's important to recognize that this is a marathon, not a race. And while that was a cliche, the twist is we don't know when this marathon ends or how long it is, right? And so while we may have certain deadlines that we're working towards, this is not a problem that will go away tomorrow. This is not an obstacle that ends in a week. Right? And so we need to think long-term about how we're sustaining ourselves, how we're sustaining our teams, and how we're sustaining our project-based outcomes. Think really carefully about that, because what can happen if we don't is that we'll experience burnout, our teams will experience burnout, and we'll lose momentum. And so this is maybe an opportunity to, again, seize the moment, but also to think about it in longer-term ways and in more sustainable ways. Try to share things that you only know are certain. So, for example, telling people that they don't need to worry about job security or that they don't need to worry about the future of a specific project, probably not a great idea. I mean, they might not have to worry about job security today, but we don't know what happens in a month. We don't know what happens in 6 months. We're maybe hopeful about what happens in 6 months, but we don't actually know. And so part of being authentic and part of making sure that our teams can trust us is to only share what we know with certainty. The moment we share something as certainty and then that thing ends up not being true, it likely increases anxiety for a lot of other people in our team. So for example, if we ensured people that they were not going to be let go, and then all of a sudden a few of the team members were let go, it's not just those few team members that are affected. It's everyone else that now doesn't believe you when you say that they don't need to worry about their job security. And the last thing we need to do right now is increase everyone else's anxiety around this. And so sharing things that we only know for certain is a way to ease some of that. It's also okay to acknowledge when we don't know things for certain, but to talk about the things we're doing to try to make sure that it's going to be okay for everyone. One of the things that research tells us is going to be helpful during this time is to also change our expectations as well as change our measurement of performance. So usually in a lot of workplaces, the way that performance is measured is based on people's process. And so, did you do this by this timeline or by this timeline or by this timeline? But instead, we should switch the way we do this to making it more outcomes-based. As long as people can meet their final deadline or get a project done within a certain timeline, it doesn't really matter whether they did it all in one day or over 1 week or longer, because at the end of the day, you just need the project to be finished and you need the outcome to be there. Because this is such an uncertain time for so many of us, we also don't know what people's day-to-day lives look like. And so it's quite possible that people are more productive in the evening, people are more productive in the morning. And so being able to let people regulate their own schedules as much as possible really makes a difference. In these circumstances, is a 9 to 5 that important? Or can people who are better suited to work at night, or their environment allows them to work better at night, can they just go with that? And this is something that's going to be unique to every single workplace, but it's important to ask ourselves as leaders, what do we need to be rigid about, and what can we be more flexible about? So these are some of the things that we can do as leaders to better support our teams in terms of our leadership approach. But then there are also some things that we can do to support our teams. And I've come up with 9 options or 9 possible ways that we can work to support our teams. So the first is to recognize that people are in all sorts of scenarios right now, right? Some people are completely isolated at home. Some people might have individuals with compromised immune systems, or older adults who are living in their home, which might make them worried about leaving. There may be children at home. Their home may not be a safe environment for them. We don't know. And so having compassion and promoting compassion within teams is essential. And this means that people might not be able to show up all of the time on time. These are different circumstances, and maybe it's an opportunity to check in rather than an opportunity to be irritated. And when you notice yourself getting irritated with people, it's probably a good time to check in, especially as a leader, to ask people how their home environments are doing. They don't owe us information, right? That's their personal stuff. But being able to ask if there are ways that you can support them to make this transition easier for them, that's something that you can do as a leader. And I'm sure that your team members would really appreciate that. And so having that compassion, but also encouraging your team members to have that compassion, can be really helpful. Of course, yes, it's frustrating if you're showing up to a meeting and the person you're supposed to be meeting with isn't there. But again, remember that everyone is doing the best that they can, and to then try to manage that frustration with compassion. Try to tell yourself, well, this person would usually show up, and when we would meet in person, they would be there. They were on time. They got stuff done on time. They usually didn't raise their voice, or they didn't speak in this way. So this is probably situational rather than a pattern of theirs. That too can help us find some compassion. The second thing is to limit COVID talk to what is necessary. Right now, so many of us are overwhelmed with information. Every time we turn the TV on, every time we're scrolling through social media, probably every time we're talking to family or friends, COVID is coming up. And it's likely pretty overwhelming. It's a bit of a downer, and it increases anxiety in an unexpected way. So it's likely also decreasing morale within teams. So when you as a leader talk about COVID, if you have to, limit it to only what is necessary within the context of the workplace. And that way it's not, oh, did you read about this and this that happened? Or did you hear about these people in this other place? It's how did the current circumstances affect how the workplace works? People can get the rest of that information somewhere else, and they don't need to be in the workplace to get it, and they don't need to hear it from you. Because then you're, again, re-triggering that anxiety and that worry that they're probably working pretty hard to manage for themselves. The third is to make space for equity. And so ensure that people are being treated with respect and dignity. Talk to people like they're people, not like they're robots or like they're screens. Recognize that everyone has a different capacity right now. Everyone is dealing with this in different ways, different levels of anxiety and worry. But that you probably also have team members who have different abilities and may need accommodations. And so being able to check in on those things, and they may not be accommodations that you even knew about because in the workplace they didn't necessarily need those accommodations. But being able to treat everyone with respect and dignity means recognizing that everyone on your team is a worthy participant and is an equal participant. And so try your best to support those people. The other way that we can do that is in how we structure things in the workplace. So for example, if we're having a Zoom meeting or a conference call, have a system in place for how those meetings will be run. In real life, we have the opportunity to check on people's nonverbal body language, right? So we can tell when someone wants to say something, and we usually, for the most part, all know to kind of stop talking so that person can have the opportunity to. But in a Zoom meeting or a conference call, we don't necessarily have the opportunity to check in on that body language. And so having a system of even like being able to raise your hand, or being able to message the host to say, hey, I have a thought, that ensures that everyone has the opportunity to participate. The other thing that you can do is to ask your team members what is going to be the best way for these meetings to be facilitated in a meaningful way where everyone has the equal opportunity to participate. It's not just about people feeling included, although that is really important, but when people feel silenced or when they don't have the opportunity to participate, you're not getting all the perspectives. And so what may be one solution that the meeting ends up with may not be the best solution, but because someone didn't get a chance to share their perspective, you only have that one solution now. And so it's not only about making sure everyone feels included, but it's also about being able to work in the best work environment that allows for the most creative and effective solutions to problems. The fourth thing is to make a single place for information and updates. As we all know, things are changing every single day, and they're changing really fast. And so if your policies at work or your approaches to projects are also changing, and you're getting lots and lots of emails, or you're sending lots and lots of emails about the way that things are changing, people are probably not reading everything, and they may get lost in the details. And so having, for example, one single Google Doc where all of the changes and policies are written down, or to have all the policies and then update them where people can see what has changed, but people can always refer to a single document as opposed to having to scroll through emails. This makes everyone's life a little bit easier and decreases stress and anxiety. And it also saves a bunch of time of people trying to know what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. And so make sure that there is one single place. And it's also possible that, you find a different way to do this, but recognizing that having a single source of information that can be updated is way easier than several documents of version 7, 8, 9, and 10, and people don't know what version we're on. The next option is to let people choose their own process and when they get work done as much as possible. Now, this is something that I talked about before, but we have different times at which we're productive, or we may be taking care of our children during the day, and so that's not the most optimal time. Some of us may prefer to work on the couch. Some of us may prefer to work at a desk. It doesn't matter. What matters is that people are getting the opportunity to work and that they're getting things done. And so let people choose their own process. Let them choose their own timelines. This is, again, not necessarily the best time for people to be as productive as they maybe once were. It may mean that they're actually more productive than they once were, but we need, as leaders, to have flexibility in order for them to be able to do this. The next thing is to let people's work be a source of purpose and of drive for them. Now, for most of us, we're in the roles we're in because we're pretty committed to them and we're pretty passionate about them. Let's make the same assumption of our team members. But given the circumstances, we may be forced into doing things that we're not necessarily that passionate about. And so for our team members, let them choose projects that they're really passionate about. Let them work on teams that they want to be on. Let them solve cool problems that are relevant to the workplace and to the world. This will allow them to feel committed and engaged to the work that they're doing. Try to give your team members more autonomy for creativity while also supporting them. And so it's not necessarily about being hands-off, but it's rather about entrusting our team members to do the things that are meaningful for them and hopefully for the workplace, while they know that they have your support and they have your leadership. Some things to ask your team members include, for example, where service can be improved in the workplace for clients. Or what's not working within the team dynamic that can be fixed? What will drive growth within the company or the organization, even during this crisis? Think about the problems that have been put off that you just didn't have time to figure out. Things like updating mission statements or figuring out a better process for something. And there might be someone on your team who's really passionate about fixing that or addressing it. And so give them the opportunity to do so. Again, this isn't necessarily one of the higher targets on the list, but what we'll find is that in being able to engage in that process, this is how we're keeping our team members engaged and motivated and making them feel like they are part of the team. Find ways that people can contribute both to the workplace or to the pandemic in meaningful ways. And so a lot of workplaces have shifted how they're focusing their time, what kinds of products that they're creating in order to be useful or helpful to the pandemic. And this is something that some of your team members may also appreciate having the opportunity to do. It doesn't mean forsaking all of their workplace responsibilities, but in a time where we feel like there isn't a whole lot that we can do to make it better, being able to work on something that you know is contributing can help you feel like you're also fighting the good fight. And so give your team members the opportunity to fight the good fight. And if you as a leader are feeling like you want to fight that good fight too, you feel like maybe you're not doing as much as you could right now, that staying at home isn't good enough for what you need to do to make this better, choose something else. Choose something you're passionate about and do it. Be invested in it and support your team members as they choose to do the same. And recognize team members' great work, right? And this doesn't necessarily need to be through monetary means, especially if monetary means are not accessible to you right now, or if you're in a tight spot. But it can even be about recognizing what everyone did really great in a week or in a month. And drawing attention to the efforts that people are putting in. It's not about necessarily giving people a gold star just because they showed up, but the people on your team are doing the best that they can, and they're probably doing it a lot better than others would be given the circumstances. And so acknowledge it, recognize it, and let them know that they are valuable team members and that you notice them. Working remotely can often make people feel a little bit more anonymous and a little bit more distant. So being able to recognize their work makes a world of a difference to them feeling like they're still part of the team, they're still being acknowledged, and they're still being recognized. And the last thing within this section is to set up opportunities for mentorship and for growth. In the workplace, we get to do that somewhat naturally by talking to people who we know have done some of the work that we're working on, by having those water cooler conversations, by walking into someone's office or knocking on their door and asking them a question. But right now, we've lost some of those opportunities. And so set them up or allow them to happen organically, but let people know that doors are open, that there are opportunities for collaboration. Invest in professional development, especially if things are slower in the workplace, because that can make a really big difference in how you recover from this as a leader, as an organization. The next thing is to keep interactions meaningful. So whether this is checking in on people, people may or may not want to talk about their personal lives, and that's okay. We can still check in with people, how they're doing with projects, how they're adapting to the change, if there's anything they need in the workplace, but build those relationships, but keep them meaningful. It's not just about the small talk. It's not just forcing conversation for the purpose of conversation. And try not to overdo it with video calls. Some people really don't like video calls. People don't like to be on the phone, and that's okay, right? And so ask people what their preference is, but don't get on a call. Don't start a Zoom meeting just to say that you guys met each other in person. It might be figuring out what medium is most effective for communication. So if it's one-way communication, writing up an email and sending it out to your team, probably good enough. If it's something that requires collaboration and conversation, then yeah, those conversational media are probably a better option. You can also try to get creative about it. Even if it's one-way communication, make a video like this one, where you still get to be yourself, you still get to interact with your team, and they still get to feel connected to you somehow. And so that's another way. But overdoing the meetings is actually decreasing productivity. It might be increasing people's anxiety. And it might be making people's lives a little bit more challenging, especially if they have children running around or they don't necessarily have a quiet workplace. Make sure your team has what they need to work from home. And so that's not only the specific software that they need, which of course would be really important. Make sure they have access to a computer, which would also be really important. But one thing that we're noticing is that people are getting really frustrated because their Wi-Fi doesn't work properly. And so if that's something that you as a leader have the capacity to invest in, do that, because that makes the difference between maybe an extra $30 to $70 a month, and someone being able to actually do their work properly. And so ask your team members, are they getting frustrated? Are they having trouble connecting to the internet? Is there something that they can do? If you have IT people in the workplace, reach out to the IT folks and find out ways that people can connect more effectively to the internet. But this has been a really big stressor. The other part of this is the accommodations that we talked about. If people need ergonomic chairs, if they need their computer set up in a certain way, reach out to IT, reach out to the occupational team, and make sure that people can comfortably and effectively work from home. Even though it's their own home, it doesn't mean that they have what they need. And so keep the lines of communication open and check in with people. The last thing that we can do to support our teams is to make time for fun with our teams. Now, there are lots of opportunities to make time for fun with our teams, but we ought to also be very careful about what fun means for people's schedules. And so, in some workplaces, weekly, they'll do like a 4:00, gathering that takes people away from their desks and into another activity. But what happens when someone's workload is so high that taking that hour out from 4 to 5 actually means that they now have to work an additional hour after that? That's not necessarily fair on them. And it also might not necessarily be the easiest thing for a team member to express to a leader or a manager that this is something that they don't want to do. And so instead of offering suggestions, ask people what they want to do. Ask people what would be meaningful for them, how frequently that thing would be meaningful for them. Instead of asking them whether they like an idea or not, because they might not be able to feel completely comfortable being honest. And when you give people the opportunity to participate, just like with the problem solving, just like with the adapting, just like with the way we facilitate meetings, they feel like they're part of the solution and they feel like they're part of the team. So with all of that, I will open it up to some questions, if anyone has any, so that we can make sure that this was as meaningful as possible for all those who are here. In the meantime, what I will do is talk about some of the work that Silm Center for Mental Health has been doing. So like I said, I'm the founder and director of Silm Center for Mental Health, which is a mental health practice in the Greater Toronto area. Some of the ways that we're working to support our communities right now is by ensuring that we have therapists available, but we're also doing a lot of pro bono and sliding scale work. So if you or team members are struggling with adjusting to what's going on, it might be appropriate for you to reach out or to encourage team members to reach out. And if you have benefits, this is also great because we would gladly accept your benefits, your health benefits. The other thing that we're doing is we're working with community centers and with organizations to help ensure that appropriate mental health information is being disseminated. And so one of the ways that we're doing this is by doing webinars much like this, but specifically for different communities and different organizations. We're also working with leaders within organizations to ensure that specific to their demographic and to the way their workplaces function, that they have the right leadership skills, that they have the right capacity to work with their team members so that the whole team can adapt. This involves some leadership coaching as well as some workplace measures that are put in to ensure that things are optimized for productivity, but also for sustainable mental health. So I see no questions here. What I'll do is I'll put up our contact information and I'll keep my eye on this chat box so that if anyone does have a question, they do have the opportunity to to have their question answered. So if you're looking to get in touch with us, we can be reached by email. It's probably the best way to get in touch with us right now. And that's at admin@silmmentalhealth.com. And then you can also follow us on Instagram and on Facebook. All of these webinars have been put on YouTube. And so you can also access our YouTube channel at the same handle there. And this is something that you're welcome to share with your teams if you think that that would be helpful. We have information on movement. We have information on grief. We have information on all sorts of things. And so feel free to reach out or to watch our videos. And if there is any way that we can be helpful to your communities right now, to your leadership style, to your mental health, please do let us know because that's what we're here for. So with that, I still don't see any questions in the chat box. If you do have specific questions, or you're looking for clarification on some of the content, or if you want a summary of some of the content even, I'm happy to share all of that. So do feel free to reach out, and I can make sure that you do have access to that. And yes, we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you for attending today's webinar, and good luck with the transition. And we hope that everyone stays safe and well. Thank you.